There are so many pseudo-well-wishers who consider it their duty to sow seeds of doubt in the souls of others. Are you really sure of her feelings? Is she not just using you? Wouldn't it be better to know for sure? Many, of course, do not pay attention to such comments and live based only on their own experience and feelings. But every once in a while, some people do begin to doubt their loved one. And if these doubts are regularly fueled from the outside, then the outcome of such a relationship leaves much to be desired. The man in our story today decided to test the feelings of his girlfriend right before their wedding. Did he do the right thing? What did he expect from this test? You will find out how it all ended. One thing is for sure, the way the girl behaved made him cry. Whether from joy or disappointment, wait and see. George had wealthy parents who tried to provide their son with everything he needed and even more. George had the best toys, the most expensive things. He grew up in great wealth and did not ever experience lack. When he finished school, he moved to the capital to attend the best university. His parents paid for his studies as well as an apartment not far from campus. There were always a lot of girls around George. He was not only rich, but also very good-looking. Every evening, he left the club with a new companion, and in the morning, he could not even remember her name. Of course, each of them tried to win his heart because such a rich young man would be quite the catch, but George was in no hurry to attach himself to anyone. Once he and his friends were discussing the coming weekend where they would go and what they would do, their conversation turned to girls, and George said that he absolutely did not care what girls would be there, as he could easily take home anyone he liked. His friends laughed and decided to bet that not everyone would agree to date him, so George told them to choose any girl, and he would certainly win her over in just a week. Then a girl named Katie passed by. She studied with them in the university, but she did not date as she was completely absorbed in her studies. George's friends knew that someone like her would never even look at George, and they unanimously picked her. Of course, George also understood this challenge, but he nevertheless decided to at least try to start a relationship with Katie. He invited her to study together. Although she was surprised at such an offer, she did not refuse. At the appointed time, they met in the library. To be honest, George thought that this would be the most boring date in his life, as he figured Katie would be dull, but she turned out to be a very pleasant and cheerful companion with a good sense of humor. Having come home that evening, George caught himself continuing to think about Katie. The next day, they met again, and then they developed a warm relationship. George decided to end the bet with his friends, admitting that he had lost so that they would no longer bug him about it, then completely devoted himself to his new relationship. Katie also had feelings for George, despite the fact that before they met, she considered him annoying. He turned out to be well-read and interesting to talk to. 2 years passed. The young people continued dating, even though many people predicted George would get bored after only a couple of months. However, his feelings only grew stronger every day. After a while, his friends decided to plant seeds of doubt in his head. They began to whisper that Katie was not as simple as she seemed. They said that the girl, having learned how wealthy his parents were, simply agreed to date him for money. At first, George did not take their words seriously, but then he wondered if it was true. What if Katie was only interested because of his money? From time to time, these thoughts appeared in his head, but he tried to ignore them. George started to think about marriage. But before his final decision, he wanted to introduce Katie to his parents. He was worried that they would say that Katie was not a match for him because she was a simple girl from a village. But to his surprise, his parents liked Katie so much that they unanimously approved. They remembered their youth, that they were not always rich and once lived in a hostel with cockroaches, but together they managed to succeed. Katie, by her character, reminded them of their youth. She was just as serious and purposeful as they were. George was happy that everything was going so well. But his friends constantly whispered to George that everything was not as good as George imagined, that it could not be a coincidence that Katie fell in love with a rich man. Does she really love him or just his money? He invited Katie over for a serious conversation in which he claimed to have been diagnosed with a very serious kidney disease. He needed a transplant that he could not afford as his parents' business had crashed. Katie listened to George and sobbed in his arms. At that moment, George regretted his story, but it was too late to retreat. In the morning, Katie called, and what she told him on the phone made him doubt Katie's sincerity. Were his friends right? Katie said that she needed to go home to her village for a few days, but she could not take him with her, and when she returned, she could not promise him anything. "We warned you," his friends said. George could not believe that Katie had left him like that, leaving him alone with his fictitious illness. A few days later, the doorbell rang. He opened the door and saw Katie crying but smiling. She ran into the apartment and started talking about her mother, about her grandmother, about her death, and some apartment. There was nothing really understandable from her speech, and then she just handed a package to him. He opened it and could not believe his eyes. There was a lot of money inside. Where did this come from? "I sold my grandmother's apartment, which I inherited from her. There should be enough for your operation. I love you so much, and together we will overcome everything." George stared at Katie, and at that moment he firmly decided that he would marry this girl at all costs. But another important conversation awaited them, that there really was no illness. Whether Katie would forgive George is a completely different story. Do you think it was necessary for George to test Katie's feelings like this? Share your thoughts in the comments. Click like if you enjoyed this story and subscribe to our channel. We have many more interesting stories for you.